Recently, I made a video about how my product startup, the pushchair that you see behind me, had failed, and unfortunately how we had to put the company into voluntary insolvency. If you haven't seen that video, you might want to check that video out first. This video is the follow-up to that, and in this video I'm going to go through the big reasons why I think this project failed. Now, it's only been a few months and my reflections might change over time, but I think it's really critical to try and appreciate what went wrong. I want to learn from that, and I really want you to be able to learn from that as well, so that you don't make the same mistakes and so that you give your project a much greater chance of success. I just want to explain why I'm doing this. The most successful hedge fund manager in the world, Ray Dalio, says pain plus reflection equals progress. And for me, it's absolutely critical that I take this project, which has cost a huge amount of time, money and effort that has failed, and that I actually learn the lessons from it and be able to move forward. Now, I've certainly felt a huge amount of pain as part of the end stages of this journey. The investors who've lost a lot of money, who believed in me, and the failure and everything that's gone around that, I've certainly been able to tick that part of the formula. But it's now about the reflection and really being able to dig into what went wrong. Let's get started. The first big thing that went wrong was clearly the timing. Now, I didn't know, no one did, that COVID-19 was coming, and that made a massive difference because all of the consumer shows shut, and that was the main way that we were going to market the product, and also all the stores shut just after we got into John Lewis, which is one of the very few big high street retailers for nursery products left in the UK. So that was hugely problematic. But there was lots of other stuff that went wrong that we had much more control over, and we could have actually got right and done better. The first big thing I think we got wrong is that we didn't tackle a big enough, common enough problem. Our pushchair has some unique features. It had a smoother ride with these shock absorbing wheels, it had a ventilation system that kept the baby cool in the carry cot, and it had natural fabrics against the child's skin. Now, those are all solutions to various different problems, but they weren't problems that parents were really thinking about and were really concerned about, or that enough parents were concerned about. I think we should have gone for a much bigger problem, say, I don't know, the bulk of storing one of these larger travel system pushchairs, or some other key issue that every parent had, as opposed to something like natural fabrics that some parents are concerned about, but not that many. And because it wasn't a big enough problem, we were constantly having to educate the people who were buying the product as to why they would want it and why it was better. But that is a massive challenge in itself, and not something I would suggest that a new brand ever takes on. Another thing that we really got wrong is that we went into the big retailer John Lewis far too early. They really were the golden ticket for our product. There weren't very many other options who could sell anything like the volume that John Lewis could, but we just weren't ready. For example, we gave them a whole lot of images and videos to put on their website to promote the product, and a whole lot of written copy about the features and functionality. But a few months later, we actually had much better images and much better converting copy that we knew was more appealing to our target customer. But getting that then changed on the John Lewis website took months. We should have really got to a point where we were really capable of selling the product, had all the right imagery and everything else, and then gone to John Lewis. And that would have really made, I think, quite a big difference. The other problem with John Lewis, and there's several of them that we're going to talk about during this video, was that really a big retailer like that isn't set up to launch a new brand. They talked about doing that with us, they were keen to do that, but it's just not something that a larger organisation like that could do. It was very difficult to get their staff at store level behind the new product and the new brand. If you're selling pushchairs, you want to sell what you know and what you know you can sell really well, and so there's a lot of resistance from the people on the shop floor to trying to sell something new at all, and that isn't a great partner for launching something new. We'll talk more about John Lewis later, but let's talk about another big mistake that we made, and this is that we didn't have enough investment. So basically, our investment got us to the point of being launched with John Lewis, and then buying another container load of stock, which we had to have in order to fulfill our contractual obligations with John Lewis, but it didn't give us enough money to market the product effectively. And the problem was then we were running on empty as a company. We had the money from the John Lewis order, but that was really just sustaining the day-to-day operations of the business. And we really needed at that point a big marketing push to drive customers into the John Lewis stores to buy the product and to get what's called the sell-through. But we didn't have enough to do that. And then when we went back out to investors at that point, we just got met with a sea of no's, because everyone was basically like, hang on a second, you've got loads of stock, sell the stock if you need more money, why are you trying to raise more money? But that's a bit chicken and egg, because unless you can market the product effectively, you're never going to sell the stock. But investors seem to really struggle to see that. We had no problem raising the £600,000 odd before that, but in the scenario where we already had product, it became much harder to raise investment. And so if I did it again, I'd make sure we raised a lot more money before we manufactured the product to cover the marketing costs as well. The next big issue really was that our digital marketing sucked. So not only did we not have enough budget for it, what we did do didn't work. We had to use small, cheap agencies because we didn't have the budget, and they really didn't have the understanding or the experience to effectively launch a new brand with all the marketing content that you need to do that and the strategy to do that. As I said earlier, our marketing was really focused on these consumer shows, and so when we had to pivot and the only way of getting to our customers was online, we just didn't have the strategy, the plan, or the competence, knowledge, skills, and everything else we needed to make that happen. And what I would say is, whenever you're doing a new project at all, even before you start prototyping or anything else, really work out how you're going to achieve the marketing and sales, because that is absolutely critical. But it is the hardest bit, and in my experience is really hard to outsource effectively as well. Now, I said we'd come back to John Lewis, so let's talk about another thing that went wrong with that. We basically picked the wrong stores with them. So the logic was, let's pick the 10 stores, because that was all they wanted to put it in initially. Let's pick those stores based on the highest number of customers coming through their nursery department. Now that made sense, right? It's a nursery product, it's going to be in the nursery department. You want a lot of people to see it, so we picked the highest traffic stores. But the problem was those stores were all over the country. There was a couple in Manchester, they were right down to Bluewater in Essex, and 3 or 4 in London, and they were hugely spread out. And that meant getting round those stores to train the teams in how to sell our product was really difficult. You couldn't do all the stores in a day. It was about 3 days, I think, to actually manage to get round them all. And really in those early days, we needed to be in some of those John Lewis stores every single week. If you can imagine, you've got a team of 40 or so people in the nursery department who come in on different days. Some of them only work Saturdays and that type of thing. Somehow you've got to train all of them in your product. And with something as complicated as a pushchair, really it takes 3 or 4 times before someone becomes comfortable selling it. And so to get in front of 40 or so staff in just one store 3 or 4 times, when some of them only work Tuesday afternoons and Thursday mornings or whatever it is actually a huge amount of effort and time. And what we really should have done is pick those stores so that we could have got around them all quickly, got into them all much more frequently, and therefore really got the staff on board with the product and the brand. And the other problem was, although the stores that we picked were high traffic, some of those, like Oxford Street in London, yes, they had loads of people coming through their nursery department, but what we didn't realise was none of them were buying our type of pushchair. It was London, and they were buying compact, small, foldable pushchairs. So what we should have done is pick the stores that were selling the most of our product, i.e. premium travel systems, rather than the compact folding pushchairs. So there was a big mistake there as well. Another reason that the project failed was the product aesthetic. Now, this is a bit of a hard thing to admit as a product designer. I really should have got this right. But our product, as you can see, looks quite similar to all the other pushchairs on the market. And that means that people don't naturally stop and look at it and then find out the unique functionality and why it's really good and how it's different. Now, what we should have done is come up with something that was a bit more eye-catching in terms of the aesthetic, something that caught attention got people to stop, whether it's at a consumer show or in a store, and then they could find out more about the product. And this is something that James Dyson got really right with his first vacuum cleaner. It looked completely different from everything else on the market, and that meant that people stopped and looked at it and then realised why, and that in theory it was better. And therefore some of those people who looked at that unique functionality and everything else went and bought it. Now there's two schools of thought here. Some people say you shouldn't have something that looks so completely different because it alienates a lot of your market. But I think it would have helped in this case to have had something that did have a striking aesthetic. Now what some of our clients have done, which is really clever, is have one model in the range that's got lime green wheels, or if it's a golf trolley, that then does grab the attention and get people to stop, but they then offer one with standard silver or black wheels. So they've got something that grabs the attention, that looks really good on a website, but then actually most people go and buy the much more standard one. And that's a good compromise actually that achieves both. It gets people to stop and look at it whilst actually not alienating people who don't want something that looks that different. Another big mistake that we made was that we spent far too much time as a team in meetings and talking about how we were going to order the business, or putting together the 45th variation on our investor presentation, or in fact making countless small changes to improve the product. What we really should have done once we've got a minimum viable product to market was put every single bit of time, effort and money that we could into marketing and selling that product. Sales matter hugely in those early stages of a product launch, and that really is where every single iota of everything we had should have gone into. We also made a bit of a mistake because we got a separate team in to sell the product, start going into retailers to train their staff in the products and everything else. And really at that point, we should have owned that. If I know, say, 100% of the features and functionality of that product, I then try and communicate that to a sales agent who's outsourced. Maybe they'll pick up 60% of what I tell them. If they then communicate that to someone in a retail store who's selling pushchairs on a Saturday, for example, then that person might pick up half of what they tell them, and all of a sudden the person actually talking to the customer is only really understanding 30% of the overall product. At that stage, I think we shouldn't have done that, and we should have been much more engaged directly with the people selling the product. Another thing that I would never ever do again is to take loan money to fund a startup. Now, most of our investment was from equity. It was money in return for shares, and that's fine. But when you start to take money as a loan and you're paying interest back on it, that can actually cripple the business in the early stages. And that was the other thing that really put off investors as well. They really did not like the fact that the business owed a large amount of money. They didn't want to invest into a company to feel like it was going to be paying back some of that loan or paying the interest on that loan. In their words, they wanted their money to be used to take the business forwards. Now, there are ways of doing that at that stage, but it just puts one more hurdle in front of an investor, and you don't want any hurdles in front of any investors at that point. You want to get it as clean as possible and easy as possible for an investor to back and put more money into. So in future, if I was funding a project, I would only ever do it from something like crowdfunding and pre-orders, or I would do it from equity. I would never saddle a new business with that kind of debt again. We really messed up on our choice of branding company. So we wanted a really good brand. We wanted to communicate all these features. We felt it was quite complex to communicate to the end customer, as indeed it was. And so we did spend a lot of money with a branding company to try and achieve all of that for us. Now, I was dubious at the time, but my business partner was really set on this particular company. And in the end, I hate to say it, but we spent over £100,000 on the branding work. And then we launched all of that at a big international trade show for the nursery sector, and it absolutely bombed. People basically said, we really like the product, but we don't understand the brand, we don't understand the messaging, it's all too complicated. We had these kind of animal logos and all this kind of other stuff, and they're like, it's just too much. We're never going to communicate that to the customer. And at that point, we basically had to scrap all of that work and start again. And that was massive. I think I'd given up something like 10% of the company for the investment money that then paid that branding firm, and all that lost time and effort as well, working with them to try and get a result. So that was a huge mistake made, and I would never in future suggest spending anything like that kind of money. What I didn't realise at the time and do now is that even big companies like some of these mattress companies like Simba and Eve, who launched their new mattresses years ago, their brands develop and change really frequently as they understand more about their customer and they understand more about what their customer wants to see. And when you first launch, I just don't think you need anything like that amount of money spent in order to develop a brand that inevitably is going to change and evolve. Now, if you're getting good stuff out of this video, if you're finding it useful, please do hit like and subscribe. It makes a massive difference. I'm saving the biggest mistake for the end of the video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Now, do you want to know more about how we raised £600,000 and how we found that relatively easy? I've written a great blog article on it, and I'm going to link that in the description below, along with some other fantastic resources from some of the lessons that I've learned. So the biggest mistake we made, we chased margin rather than volume of sales in the early days. We priced our product at $8.99. It was very slightly cheaper than some of the leading branded competitor products, but the problem was that just didn't get us enough sales. Quite a lot of retailers didn't take the product because they thought it was too expensive, and I'm sure that if we come in with much more cost-effective pricing for consumers, so they could get all the premium brand features but say for £200 or £300 less, then we would have got a lot more sales. Now, our focus in board meetings and everything else was all around margin, but that was a huge error, I think, in retrospect. If we'd had some sales volume and some traction, we could have gone back to investors and said, look, we're selling quite well, but we just need to speed this up. We need more money for marketing or whatever else it is, and we could have probably pulled in more money. But because the sales weren't there, our investors eventually got to the point of saying, we're just not prepared to put any more money in at all. Now, we could have clawed back margin later, we could have put our prices up later, but we were given the wrong advice. We were told that once you drop your price, you can never put it back up again. And as such, we were a bit afraid to do that. But that wasn't true. And I think COVID's changed a lot of that as well, with the shipping crisis and the prices that have gone up in raw materials. A lot of sectors have seen significant price rises. And so I think that advice actually was wrong. It was probably wrong even at the time. There were other brands that launched 2 or 3 years before us that had actually done exactly that. They'd come in at a much lower price point, but with all the functionality, they gained market share, and then they'd edged the price up when the demand was there. And I would strongly suggest that as a pricing model instead. I've just done a video on product pricing with a fantastic sales agent with loads of experience called Nick Christie. Do check out that video. I'll also link it in the description below so that you get the pricing on your product right, because get it wrong and it can kill the whole thing. Now, you might be a bit surprised that with all the experience of working with hundreds of entrepreneurs that I still made so many mistakes with my own product launch. It's a really difficult thing to do, and it's a really tricky thing to get absolutely right. We did get a lot right, and when we were selling products at consumer shows and we were demoing the product ourselves, we got really good sales and we got some fantastic customer reviews from people who really loved the product. The chief buyer for nursery at John Lewis said that it was the first major innovation in pushchairs she'd seen in about 20 years, and she thought the product was fantastic. So we did get a lot of it correct, but it is a challenging thing to do, and there are clearly quite a lot of mistakes that we made as well. But I really hope that you can learn from these mistakes and that you can not make the same errors and you can have more success with your product, and that your product launch is a huge hit. If you found the video helpful, please do hit and subscribe. There's some great resources in the description. Check those out as well.